opposition's world, a world in which people are robbed of the ability to be loved, robbed of the ability to love others, is a world in which people and the people around them are consigned to a fate of loneliness, to pain, to depression, and ultimately to a meaningless existence. Now, what is the crucial delta in today's debate? I think the burden on side government to win today's debate is very simply to prove the unique benefit of both love and the subsequent process of loss, right? Now, before all of that, here's a few points of characterization for the House. First of all, what exactly is love, right? I think that it's very easy for all the teams in today's motion to misconstrue this as simply limited to, for instance, romantic love, right? But I think that love is a lot wider than all that. I think love is any deep and emotional connection that you have to another person. I think love can manifest primarily as parental love. It can manifest as platonic love between you and your friends, and of course, it can also manifest as romantic love, right? Now, what is the world in which opposition wants to champion? I think that in order to have a fair debate, opposition must accept that without the capacity to love, you must also have the capacity to feel other emotions, right? Opposition cannot come out here and tell us today, because they don't have fiat, that people aren't going to feel as much when they, for instance, lose something that is quite dear to them that isn't a loved one. Now, on to the second point of characterization as to what the nature of loss is, right? I think that the nature of loss is something that is universal simply because the things that result in loss are things outside of our control. For instance, loved ones passing away. For instance, friends passing away. For instance, losing a large amount of your income in a financial crisis, etc. Right? Now that out of the way, on to the positive material on our side. First of all, on the benefits of love and why love is a universal basic need that must be met for every member of society. Why it is so uniquely beneficial on our side of the house, right? Now, what exactly are the mechanisms by which love benefits us as a person? I think there are four main mechanisms as to how this works, right? First of all, it is the availability of another person to your own emotions. This openness and honesty that you would not otherwise have had if you were interacting with, say, for instance, just an acquaintance. I think the ability for you to trust someone and therefore on that basis love somebody, the basis for you to, for instance, share whatever has happened in your life with that person, to share a part of yourself, to see yourself in that person, and to see not only another but also yourself in another, is something that is so uniquely beautiful to our side of the house, and it's also a huge amount of emotional catharsis that side opposition cannot easily claim on their side of the house. I think the second mechanism by which love is uniquely beneficial on our side is that the huge amount of emotional investiture that it takes into loving somebody inherently makes that process meaningful, right? We see this in, for instance, people pursuing their careers because of a very strong emotional investiture into that specific activity. The metrics by which most people in today's world view their lives as meaningful is, first of all, the amount of effort that you put into something, and second of all, how emotionally invested you are in that. I think that loving somebody in its basest form is like a huge amount of emotional investiture, and also takes a huge amount of effort to know somebody, to trust somebody, and therefore to love somebody, right? That is something they cannot claim on their side as well. Now, third, the third mechanism as to how love is uniquely beneficial is that there is a very strong sense of just like interpersonal connection that fulfills our basic psychological needs, right? I think it's undeniable on both sides that humans are inherently social animals, and the way in which this this social nature of ours manifests is at its very basis level a deep emotional connection towards someone else, right? We think that the very reason why emotions exist in the first place are to ensure that we are able to interact with people on a deeper level than just mere conversation, right? I think that at the point at which you're able to, for instance, become physically intimate with somebody, that is something that you cannot you cannot very easily hand wave away on side oppositions, because it's something that simply isn't another option. And I think the fourth mechanism as to how love is inherently beneficial on our side is that it is the basis for all other human connections, right? As I stated before, parental love, right? I think that receiving love from your parents is going to be a huge advantage when it comes to navigating other social situations in their later life. I think that on side oppositions, a world in which you are not loved by your parents is a world in which people grow up to become really, really socially inept, and therefore, no thank you, unable to navigate other social situations outside of their own immediate surroundings and family, right? Therefore, I think that the counterfactual on side opposition is a very desolate existence for any person on the ground, right? Because of the four mechanisms I've proven to you. First of all, they're unable to trust someone else with their own emotions, and therefore these emotions are bottled up in them most of the time. Second of all, they are unable to connect with somebody else in a much more meaningful way than just mere conversation, and therefore unable or I don't know, just like basically unable to share anything about themselves to another person, right? I think that third of all, because of their capacity to feel some amount of tragedy over, for instance, the lack of meaningful personal relationships in their own life, they're likely to suffer very, very adverse emotional consequences on their side of the house, right? This leads to a very negative downward spiral because people end up seeking solace in, for instance, drugs, for instance, hurting others in general, and also like basically like find solace in things that are harmful to themselves in the long term, right? Therefore, I think that I think the vote that side opposition has to defend on their side of the house is one that we do not desire at all. It's much better to love and lose than to not love at all. Now, onto the benefits of loss, right? Well, how people are inherently more equipped to deal with loss on our side of the house. As I said before, loss is going to be parallel on both sides, right? And I think that the main delta by which we win this clash is that simply on our side, because of the sheer amount of emotional investiture into that one person, even if you do lose that person, it is much more likely they're able to cope with it in a much more better and constructive way than on-site opposition, right? I think there are three main mechanisms of how this works. First of all, there's the remembrance of the person itself. I think that reminiscing like short snippets of relationship with somebody, even after that person has passed or just like left your life in general, is something that is incredibly helpful towards you as a person because you're able to seek solace in the memory that somebody loved you once. On their side of the house, nobody has ever loved you, and therefore it's impossible that you're going to get the same amount of emotional solace that we get on our side of the house, right? I think that the second mechanism by this book is that because of the fact that you have loved somebody before, you have an obligation to honor their memory in your own mind, right? So for instance, you wouldn't pursue, for instance, self-sabotaging or self-harmful behaviors after you lose somebody on our side because that's simply not what the other person who loved you so deeply would want, right? I think that the third mechanism as to how we are better able to deal with loss on our side of the house is simply by virtue of the fact that you as a person having loved somebody before are much more able to branch out into your wider like societal web and therefore find connections that are able to help you better deal with this loss, right? Because of the fact that you're much more better socially equipped on our side of the house. Therefore, I think the counterfactual on side opposition is that people, because of their innate desires to love and because of the inability of others to love them, are going to feel not only a great sense of tragedy on their side of the house. I think they're also very likely to attach this sort of like loving attitude towards things that are material and therefore temporary in nature and not be able to mourn the loss of these things by eventuality in the long term. Go aside, government.
The grief you feel when you lose someone tells you how much you love that person. Given this, the loss of true love is an experience that would cause immeasurable amounts of pain that nobody ought to be subject to. Two things. Firstly, we'd still have emotions on our side, and like we would still have emotions on our side. We tell you the brain will be able to find replacements. We just, for example, shy away from accepting and showing true love. Secondly, we'd still have strong relationships on our side, for example, between friends, family, etc. Because this debate, it does not mean that like parents and siblings would stop loving you. This debate was about those unique instances where love could be lost. We tell you that the love from parents, and siblings, was something that was eternal. Like that was something that would probably, I was like looking at them sacrificing themselves for you. This was a love that ran the course of their life and longer. I think this means that these sorts of love fall outside the scope of this debate. But firstly, let's talk about ultimately why you're less happy. Because by contrast, why it's better on our side. I think firstly, you have a direct point of comparisons between when you're happy and you're sad. Then you're constantly drawn back to these times. The human mind is built on layers of being. But what I mean by this is you relive happiness when you lose it. And that is upsetting because it makes you question, it makes you blame, it makes you fault yourself. Like, am I at fault when you do lose that happiness? It was so hard to bounce back from this, and some never do. When you truly love someone, it was really hard to go back. We're not talking about high school crushes or flings. We're talking about multi-year relationships with genuine love. That's why suicide is the highest killer of elderly. Grief kills when their partner of 20 years passes before them. So then, for the average person who has truly loved, they're subject to a measurable amount of pain when they lost that. And that was something that was extremely hard to recover from. Secondly, even if you do move on, you carry that trauma and memory of loss with you. That makes it incredibly hard to love and trust another person ever again. That's why when your partner has cheated on you, or you divorced with someone who you truly loved, or when you just exited from a once romantic turned extremely abusive relationship, it is extremely hard for you to place your love and trust in someone ever again. So then this scarred you forever outside of this love. And this affects your daily life. You'll question your platonic relationships as well. You'll struggle to initially socialize, etc. To concretize these impacts, you lose your only support networks in your darkest times. And like this, and what I mean by support networks is your friends. Because you stop being able to be vulnerable and place your trust in them for that fear of being broken. And after you push away these people who didn't deserve to be pushed away, your friends of like 5 years who you place all your trust in, after you push these people away, the rest of your life as well runs the loss of who you once loved. You were never able to make even more support to even find new friends after this. The two reasons above were impacts around the extent of your whole life. That is why they ought to be debate winning. I'm telling you that a random night, 10 years after your loss, you'll still think about the past and what you once were in bed. I think this response to humans are social animals and all those harmed by PM, because I think it explains to you then that you lose on our side, you lose all those social connections, or at least like a vast majority of them. On their side, you then at worst on our side, you lose having a true loving relationship with a partner, something that's arbitrary in comparison to having all those, like working together as a community, etc. But thirdly, when you put your heart into loving someone, you run the risk of losing it all. The most common love is unfortunately one-sided love. Finding your soulmate is like a harsh facade that was painted by fairy tales, painted by romantic movies and like shows and books, and with like princesses and knights in shining armor, stuff like that. That means that you love someone, but you were only to be rejected and failed. To you did everything for them. You tried to like read the signs. You tried to like appear cool, try to appear rich. You try to be someone that you weren't to try to win them over. In reality, these impacts play out sort of like what toxic masculinity like looks like, but it's not exclusive to men. It means that victims think that it was a mistake to ever love someone first. It means it seems like a mistake to ever invest into that relationship first. The expectation now is to be nonchalant or not show emotions, and so just like let that you shouldn't chase, that you should let other people chase. I think that was extremely harmful to society because it meant that relationships were one-sided, or just like people weren't actively giving out love or trust at all. It means that when people were vulnerable, they weren't able to confide in others because they didn't want to show that weakness. I think the messaging by side government is one that is afraid to show weakness and vulnerability. So then, let's deal with the overarching harms let's deal with the oversiding harms by a prime minister. Firstly, it tells you're unable to connect with other people and you're unable to share without the commonality of a universal experience. We tell you that love is not these sort of relationships are not a universal commonality. Like the harsh reality is that some people in this world will never find a love at all. And I think that is extremely dark. But I think what that means is that love is not the universal experience that binds all people. I think there are other things that bind all people because the people that have love still have strong connections with their friends. And that means that's what's able to hold them together. That's what's able to keep them going. That's why they're able to go to work and live in society, etc. Any more POIs before I keep moving on?
Passion is the heart of growth. Why halt the most dynamic aspect of human condition?
Sorry, can you say that again? I didn't hear you. Sorry, I was going to sound off. Yeah, keep going.
Passion is the heart of growth. Why halt the most dynamic aspect of human condition?
Okay, so I think the POI was you need to be able to feel lost to be able to grow. I tell you that there's why would you need to be able to grow in the instance of love? For instance, if you're never gonna love, why would you need to learn about love in the first place? Presumably you'd give love to your friend, or you connect with friends on a daily basis. You failing at work. It's really hard to get better at love. You're acting like love is a skill that gets better over time when you put more work into it. Love is something that you either have or you don't. You can try to understand someone more, but at the end of the day, that you can also do friendships, etc. The next thing they tell us is that love is an emotional solace, and that without this, you just don't have this comfort and be able to live a human life essentially. We told you that the brain can make up excuses for love. It can find solace in other things. That's why they gave us the example of drugs. Probably don't want to talk about drugs, right? But you can just find solace in other things. I think there's much more meaningful things in the human life, right? When people have a bucket list, sure, one of those bucket lists might be to meet the partner of your life. But I think when you insofar as meeting the love of your life limits everything else you can do in that bucket list, that something that you would probably want to do first, if I want to go skydiving or I want to jump off a waterfall, stuff like that. But I think that's something that's also meaningful to you, to a really small human experience. I think at the end of this speech, what we tell you is then your other ways to be social. We told you that love was losing someone you truly love was extremely hard to bounce back from, and some people never do. We ought never run that risk. That's why you ought to oppose. For these reasons, how to oppose.
Let's start with a few rebuttals. I find it very interesting how side opposition tries to claim that familial love is not love, in the sense that your love from parents will not be eventually lost, but it's going to endure for all eternity. I feel that this is probably one of the most like squirrely attempts I've ever seen to try to wiggle out of the nuance of emotion. Judge, I really don't think it's very fair, and they don't have the fiat to say that. I believe that the love for parents, the fact of the matter is that your parents are going to eventually die, right? Like my parents are going to eventually die. The love for my parents is eventually going to be lost. But the fact of the matter is that is this clinging on to the love that I've experienced for the past like 80 or for the past like 60 or 70 years that allows individuals to overcome this loss and become who they truly are. Like several points of response to what they've said. They first tell us that the pursuit of love is a high from which you cannot recover. A few points of rebuttals for this, which I'll probably get to in my main substantive, but the short answer is that there are existing support mechanisms for the loss of love because of how prevalent it is and how literally everybody who has like a parent who love or cared for them will eventually go through that, slash a partner. But moving on from that, the quick response is that there's freaking no existing support mechanisms for not experiencing love, right? Like what in the world is the therapist going to do with you when you say I can't find love or I just reject love? Like what's the therapist going to say? Like if you make a conscious decision not to find love, or you have been forced into not finding love by like any other circumstance, it's obviously going to be very hard for you to fulfill the emotional gap in your life. And add this on to like the existing glamorization, no thank you, of love in like popular culture. We see how like individuals all dramatize love as the most like transformative experience that you'll ever have in your entire life. Now look at like movie shows, look at like your Korean dramas, all of them paint love as this sort of like super ideal concept that's like transcends the human experience and is this like one singular thing in your life that you must aspire for. When like these individuals like see like, hey, why can't I experience this? And understand that these individuals also have feelings too. So if they are denied this feeling, then I think that their simple alternative to not finding this kind of emotional fulfillment is simply like ticking off your bucket list, which like I think is like a very like not very nuanced explanation for that. Like I feel what these individuals will do is they'll try to seek like very extreme high forms of ecstasy that try to mimic or at least like replicate these forms of emotional connection. These things can be only found things like drugs. Like seriously, I don't think that skydiving is going to like help the fact that your parents have not loved you for the first 20 years of your life. Like frankly, that's not going to ease the emotional burden. And no thank you. And considering the fact that all your friends have like the experience of like being loved, like they also tell us that oh no, like friends, like your friends can also love you even if nobody else loves you. Like the fact of the matter is that if your friends love you, like there's a word for it, it's called platonic love. Platonic love is also love, but like never mind, let's ignore that and pretend that platonic love like isn't love. Like even if it isn't, right, your friends aren't going to be the first priority with regards to like your interpersonal relationships, right? Like your friends have like their wife to turn to, their friends have like their children to turn to. Like understand like your friend isn't always going to be this like omnipresent shoulder you can cry on, or at least be at that emotionally invested in you, the point whereby you can consider it so-called like the true love that like opposition claims. But like so moving on to my main substantive, we tell you that love is the most acute form of interpersonal relationships and is a fundamental human need. So this basically like ties back to what my previous speaker says. And psychology tells us that an individual's basic needs or requirements is interpersonal relationships. Why is this the case? Like look at cases where individuals are locked up in solitary confinement, right? They eventually like go mad after like a few days, probably because they don't have human interactions. Like love is essentially human interactions dialed up to the most like meaningful and the most like and the highest degree. So the fact of the matter is that no man is an island, and relationships shape and define the metric of a person's personality. So what does all of this tie into? I think the first thing it ties into is fulfillment and acknowledgement. Like self-actualization can only come through the fact that if you have actually been loved by a person. For example, if your parents tell you that you are valuable and they love you for who you are, that is also one thing that's extremely validating to an individual. I think it's very hard for individuals to find that validation from themselves because no thank you, because that's blatant narcissism. And even if they try to find it from other sources, let's say drugs, money, cars, or maybe like having like all your friends in the world, I don't think anything can actually substitute for that void in your life. The second thing is that there's a parallel on that side whereby if you're not living a bubble, you are not living in a bubble where there's no love. You are living in a world whereby the majority of individuals around you are experiencing love via by like their parents and their spouses, and you are like the one fellow that isn't loved. Like contrast, like I already talked earlier about the glorification and idealization of love. And if you're constantly wondering what is this mystical magical asset that you can never obtain, right? Like you cannot wave away this harm because the side opposition is essentially relegating you to a reality whereby there are no support structures. There are no support structures for whereby individuals never attain love, but there are support structures for individuals who have lost their loved ones. But before that, I'll take a from closing. Okay, no point from closing. Okay, I'll move on. So the loss you experience from losing love isn't as bad as opposition claims because of the presence of existing support structures for dealing with the loss of someone you love. Now, why is this the case? Like, understand that the loss of a loved one is something that has been occurring since like human civilization, like when like existed, right? Like the prevalence of a loss in love is why there's so much attention on it, why there's so much research into trying to help people get over their depression, why there's so much research into what's the best way to comfort someone who is grieving over a loss. Like for example, like death, like the death of a loved one, the death of your family members, the death of your parents, all of these are all dealt with by like various support groups that try to help you. Like look at this, like you have counseling, you have your support groups, you have like groups comprised of individuals who have all lost your loved ones. The fact of the matter is that no thank you can bond over this like so-called shared grief, and the point of these like groups and these support structures is to teach individuals and to allow them to focus on the positive experiences that the love has garnered over the past few years rather than focus on like the simple negative aspects of losing the love. And I think the main caveat here is that no, like millions of individuals around the world aren't going to necessarily like commit suicide. Like lots of people die every day, no thank you, but you're out of time also. And that, but you don't necessarily teach individuals that just because they don't have love, like it's not like, but the on the parallel on their side is that there's no consolation for never being loved in your life. Like, do you see any support group that says like, oh, I'm lonely for like my whole life, but that's okay? Like, I don't necessarily see very strong support for that, whereby in like whereby in status quo, like the love, like the compensation that you get for losing love is sort of offset by this community that everybody can buy now because it's such a common human experience, right? Like for example, like the state will also pay you money, like if you like your loved one dies or like insurance. Like the fact of the matter is that you have no love, the only compensation you have will come from very like shallow sources. Like what do I mean by that? Like if you feel that if no one loves you, you're eventually going to start going to the mentality like, is there something wrong with me? Because you see like love like glorified in like the media, you see like individuals like walking around the street, and the fact of the matter is that you're going to like value in non-interpersonal, non-human relationship assets. What does this look like? This look like pursuing cash and like maybe like sniffing drugs, and all of this ultimately turn out to be a very empty form of fulfillment to fulfill an obvious gap that you never will achieve. So now, worst case scenario, individuals will briefly struggle with loss, but at least there are some form of basic support mechanisms that teach individuals to draw from the earlier memories. Whereas the best case is a world whereby like individuals try to struggle with the fact that they have never experienced love in their life and the content of that. Go with side proposition.
Grief kills. One's mortality rates spike after the death of a loved one when you've lost someone that you were extremely close to. And the issue for opening government in this debate was that they expected people to be rational, that they expected people to look back, to investigate, and to discover bits of wisdom within the love that they had left behind. But the reality of this debate was that this was not a world where insurance, where money could ever replace these people. These were people with whom you had a distinct emotional connection, and in those circumstances, no one was ever rational after death. People cannot forgive themselves after the death of a loved one, even when they know they had no hand in it, because people are irrational. They seek to blame themselves. They seek to take that blame upon themselves, and that was exactly what hurt opposition at a time when you were the most vulnerable. I'm going to do three things in this speech. First, clarifying. Secondly, explaining why their side is far worse. Finally, explaining why our comparative is acceptable. Let's start with the fair read of this debate, because clearly the burden on OO is not to defend someone who has never experienced emotion. That would be a slam dunk OG. What we're defending is that there's basic tenets of existence that still exist. For example, your parents still exist to some degree, but since like nothing like love being lost in its totality is not possible, neither is complete loneliness, we think that this is a debate about someone's conception of themselves. It is not a debate about what is real, because what is real is never able to be proven to be definite. It is a debate about whether someone sees themselves as someone that is loved and then lost, versus whether someone feels like they've never loved in the first place. What conception is better, since none are 100% possible? Let's go on with loved and lost. I think there's 5 unique harms that they failed to deal with at the end of that speech. The first is that now you have a direct point of comparison between your happiest moments and your saddest. You have one which is upsetting. You have one which is troubling, because you could have imagined how your life could have played out so differently in ways that were so much better if you had stayed with that person. It's the reason why people become despondent, because they feel like they've lost a part of themselves. But secondly, we explained that your mind is always drawn back to that love. In the same way that DPM talks about using drugs, love is a drug. Love creates serotonin, which goes into your system and is addictive. It is a drug. And we'd say that the emotional scars left on people run deep, particularly when it's someone as close to you as a significant other or a long-term friend. We're talking about true love in these circumstances, about genuine love, about the love of years, not the love of seconds and glances. It's what makes people have this trauma for years and years to come. It carries them to new depths once they've lost that love. But thirdly, it's because you feel like you've lost something.
It's because you feel like you've failed. And I would note that love, as they try to explain, is not something which is symmetric. Anchoring bias exists. And the reality is people become attached to the ones they love. As OG explains, they emotionally invest within those people. And often it's the small things. It's the daily routines that people go through. Things like waking up with someone next to you in bed. It's things like going downstairs with a greeting. And it's those habits that people cling to for things like stability. That's why under opposition, your life is upended in a way that is sad, in a way that is troubling, in a way that is destabilizing for the rest of your life. Because those people are no longer there. They are no longer there to hold you down when you needed them most. But fourthly, it was because you blamed yourself. It was because the mind yearns for companionship. But it can, like in some circumstances, the mind can be convenient. But in other circumstances, it can also be devastating. And when you experience such a large degree of harm, when you experience such a large degree of regret, the mind cannot explain away the hurt that you feel. And that's when people turn inwards. They blame themselves. They ask questions of themselves. What could I have done to keep them with me? Would this world be different if I had done something different? And all of that is deeply irrational, yes, but it's the grieving process. People deal with grief in extremely irrational ways. And those ways are ones that cannot be that are so devastating for their life, and many of them never bounce back from. But fifthly, we explained that this made you far more averse to love in the future because the person you knew was not replaceable. You could never fill that hole that they left in your life because they were all so unique. And that's exactly when you knew how bad it was. You knew how bad it was when you engaged in love and then lost it all. And that explains why you never engaged again, because you felt that hurt and you wanted to escape that hurt at all costs. At the end of this first theme, love is clearly something which is good, but a world in which you are given a taste and then the rest of the plate is thrown away will always leave you clinging for more. When they are gone and only a fleeting memory of their existence remains with you, that is something that is extremely devastating. People fly across the world to say goodbye to loved ones. Think about what happens when they actually lose them. Next then, let's go on to our comparative. Notably, a lot of the things that opening government says are kind of symmetric. For example, therapy, friends, all things that are symmetric. Programs for loneliness now exist in status quo as well. And those are things that are relatively effective and have been demonstrably effective at consoling grief. I'll take a point if there is one.
No. I love debate, and I know that I might lose this debate, but that doesn't mean that I'll go through endless trauma and truly be irrational to myself at the end of this debate. How does this point stand on your side?
Debate is not as close to you as someone that you've loved. To insinuate that is just offensive. Like, for example, a mother or a partner that you've loved for like 20, 30 years of your life, when they leave you, that is not the same as losing a hobby of debate. Debate might be something that is interesting to you now, but think about what happens when you lose a loved one. That is clearly far worse. That is an insane proposition from you guys. Okay, let's talk about the rest of our comparative. The first thing that opening government says is that you're unable to connect to other people. Clearly untrue. As Martin points out, there's other things that bind people. Common experiences, things like sport, things like family. And just because you haven't had love, say at the age of 10, that when you're immature, that doesn't mean you can't connect with other people. It means that you connect to other people in different ways, in ways that mean that eventually you can find love on the outside of the house too. They say that no one has ever loved you. Firstly, we point out that the mind, as we explained, is a very convenient instrument, and they're likely to make up narratives to make you feel better. Notably, we explained that this is impossible under opposition for the very, very clear reason that you know they left. You know they left a hole in your heart, and that is something that your mind, however it might try to, cannot fill. But secondly, we responded by saying that, like, maybe it means that, like, maybe there's no love right now, but it doesn't mean that there's no love in the future. You can still have love in the future, and that is something that many people strive towards. That is something which is empowering for them, and that is what keeps them going on. Finally, they say that at least under their side of the house, you have a memory of solace. The issue is you are no longer with that person. You can't reach them anymore. You can no longer reach the emotional catharsis and the solace which OG describes. And again, that just reinforces our mechanism of comparison, because that is a comparison which is upsetting, because you know how good it was while it lasted, not what like that was so far, so much worse. Ultimately, in this debate, what we presented was a very hard, but ultimately acceptable and empowering way to improve your life in the pursuit of love. With more, like, you move on with hopes for the future, whereas those hopes are dashed under side government, where you feel so depressed, where you fell into those pits of despair in a way that means you never felt you could come back again. Losing love is clearly far worse.
Panel, look at how passionate OO is about in their speech when screaming at his POI. If that doesn't emit love, I don't know what else does. Few points to illustrate this claim. Okay, firstly, on rebuttals to the OO, notice that they said three things. They said that you feel lost, you feel bad when you lose something, and therefore it's ultimately worse. However, I'm still unsure as to why this is worse, because at worst on our side, if we tell you it's symmetric, because the negative memories are offset by the positive ones. Notice that the feeling that like the bad feeling that you get because you hurt only exists because you felt good and you crave it now because of that. Secondly, they said that we're going to miss and crave love. At worst, we tell you can at best, we tell you can replace this love even if it's not the same and just a mitigatory factor. For example, you can find another significant other at worst. I'm sure that, just because you break up at high school, that doesn't ruin your life. You find another partner and move on. Secondly, at best, we tell you that you only crave and miss this love because you've had these positive memories in the past that you can't otherwise replace, and therefore we tell you in terms of utility. I don't know. I think we weigh much more. Lastly, on just time and utility and the comparative on utility. Notice that your parents die when you're of old age and when they're of old age. Therefore, we tell you just on like scale and weighing alone, the feeling of you receiving love with your parents is likely to transcend that of the short-term loss that you feel when your parents when your parents. Okay, lastly, I think it's incredibly important to mention that people move on from sorrows, even if it doesn't happen early. That's literally why, even if for example, my grandma were to die, that doesn't mean that I'm going to hang myself. And that doesn't mean I'm going to be in sorrow for permanently in my life. Okay, I'll take the POI.
Yeah, we told you your parents love you till the very end and thus continue to love you. Do you stop loving someone after they die?
No, but then that sorrow that you characterize slowly fades away. And I've also rebutted this in my first 2 minutes of the speech on how you can kind of replace and mimic this type of love. And a lot at worst, you only crave and want love from your parents because the love that you gained from your parents was so beneficial at the first half of your life, which we tell you outweighs way more than anything that you say. Okay, 3 extensions that we're going to provide then. First, we're going to actually prove why everything is inherently finite and you lose everything at one point, other than the one-liner that OG talks about other than the one-liner that OG talks about. I.e., we tell you, I think this is incredibly important because OG never proves why these impacts are likely to manifest for all aspects of love and why love isn't why love isn't just permanent in the first place, i.e. their points are contingent on you losing everything at one point. Why do we tell you that in 99% of times you are going to lose everything? I think it's going to manifest in 3 main ways. First, your physical health deteriorating because several of your passions we have is contingent on you being physically well. If my voice is unwell, I'm unlikely to debate. This looks like sports as well. Secondly, on financial mishappening, notice that you aren't going to be rich forever and you need to fulfill certain financial duties in order to fulfill your love for something. When your child dies because of starvation, because you were financially unwell, we tell you that is another aspect of love. Lastly, though, on the impermanence of life, notice that people don't live forever, so you can't actually love people forever. Your parents are likely to die before you because you're significantly younger than them. Therefore, we count all aspects of love in this debate. Okay, a second extension then on why love isn't only about people and why this is important other than the weird POI response that was given in their OO case. Our extension in our debate that will win this round is that love isn't always about a relationship and a tangible outcome and is a universal language of interest. Why is this true? This is the fact that the op is trying to take this debate by saying that you won't want the emotional burden is truly wrong, as principally the main reason why people love, although they know they might lose something, is because of the passion and the road that you take when loving. Why is this true? We tell you, you love your state football team, although you might know that they might lose in the future, and they win isn't contingent on the end outcome, and it's the fact that the enthusiasm you create when you actually love. It's a love for the game, the environment, the people, the moment you create from laughing, crying, or bleeding, or making memories. Yeah, sure. In the end, you might be mad that you might have lost and got defeated, but it's a love that still drives you forward. On Ops World, we don't see this memory occurring at all because the fact that you're able to surround yourself with an environment with similar interests of loves, all brought together by love. We get the benefit to the stakeholder building memories, character, and finding who you inherently are as a person. We tell you that the opportunity cost is significant here because loss, unlike the extreme case that the opening half is characterized on parental losses, which happens way less, we tell you is the building block and the bonds to a more shared identity and community. We help stakeholders get out of their bed, being lazy, not willing to do anything, and fulfill their actual purpose of life. Notice that loss isn't always dramatic and can be replaced with a win as well. I think the most important factor that the opening half is missing is that the loss and end product doesn't always have to be tangible. You learn from the loss and you're able to durate and battle towards with this love. This looks like you losing from this debate possibly, which the other side are going to. And I think we're all here because we love debate, we love dialogue and mixing around with people. The fact that I know and you know that we might both lose shows how similar shows a similarity of love for a debate that brings us together. At the end, we wouldn't even be enter this event or time if we never loved debating as a whole. We're able to then impact more people, not only because the stakeholders, but bring more people and influence more people. More people are willing to love and take the opportunity, not only strictly limited to personal physical losses of people. I think this is incredibly important because losses of people don't happen as often as losses that are out of order, as losses in wins or games in football games or whatever, because that just happens way more frequently than when you lose other people. Therefore, why do you meet your friends if it's going to end somehow? You're probably going to separate at the end when you graduate college. It's because we need the experience that humans naturally need. Lastly, then, we tell you love isn't always going to be perfect, and it's incredibly important for the individual to know this. I think OG is incredibly uncharitable in the fact that they assume that the love will always be perfect and it's going to manifest to be perfect. Therefore, we tell you when people glorify the concept of love, they feel like they're missing out. However, love might not actually be so. That's why aromantic people exist. That's why some people don't love at all, love other people at all physically, because they just are built that way. In that case, we tell you when you never experience love, you're gonna glorify to the point where you think that it's just so high value when it really isn't, because love is dependent on the person itself and specific to everyone. For all reasons, I'm so proud to stand on closing government.
Panel, the situation that we are presented with today is a losing battle. Nobody comes out of this situation better. So what we as side closing opposition aim to do today is to reduce as much pain and suffering one will receive through this experience that is called life, right? Now, before I continue with some of the substantives that I bring about today, let's start with some rebuttals for the opening half and the member of government, right? Number one, let's start with the Prime Minister's speech. Prime Minister basically characterizes and broadens the entire borders of this debate to just about any relationship or any interaction that any individual will ever receive in their life. Now, there are a few clarifications that we must make in this debate because so far it's been really, really messy and there's been a lot of clashes about disagreements, right? So let's clear some things up. One thing that we need to clarify in today's debate is that opening government somehow uses love super carelessly. They throw the word around as if people just love just about anything that they come with contact with, right? And if that's the case with you, good for you. But it's not how it works for the majority of the world. Love takes time, right? Love takes sacrifice. Love doesn't just happen in mere seconds or minutes or even days. It takes time. And if proposition now tries to convince you that this applies to just about anything in the world, do not be convinced by them, panel. Number thing that you need to talk about is, I think the biggest thing that we need to understand for today's debate is that when we are presented with this hypothetical, it doesn't mean that we're just going to never come into contact with anybody in life, right? That just doesn't make sense. It also doesn't mean that we're going to
opening.
Thank you. No, thank you. All of a sudden. This is not what this hypothetical is about. What it is about is that when we enter another relationship, we remain cautious. We don't throw the word love around easily because we know that it might be lost, right? Number three, clarification. The third clarification that we need is when we meet this motion, it doesn't mean that we're going to never love in our life. It means that we won't love things where the love disappears. So closing government constantly bringing up things like debate or sports really doesn't make sense to me because that love won't disappear, right? The game won't just suddenly close down or shut down, right? We don't really see how that's actually really applicable in this situation. No, thank you. On a side note, they keep on using an example of how if you lose in sports, you're gonna lose the love and whatnot. But if you actually do lose love over something that just because you lost one game, you might be actually a fake fan, right? The third thing we need to talk about is this is a very, very messy clash about what it truly means to have love, to what it means to have love be lost, right? And the ambiguous gray areas about whether parental love is counted is something that I want to offer an input on. Now, when you first love your parents from birth, I highly doubt that you knew much about loss. So in any other dark issues at all. So therefore, I really don't think that this really is applicable in this situation because you wouldn't really truly understand the love loss, right? The next thing that we need to talk about is Prime Minister also says that they think that people in their world world are likely to be able to handle loss well. Now, I'm not sure if there's they didn't really provide a lot of characterization or mechanization as to how they would actually do this. They just throw out bullshit such as support groups or research online or psychological reports. But if you truly just read through all these psychological reports, will you be able to tell me that suddenly all loss that you've ever received, all hurt you've ever received from losing a loved one is just going to suddenly disappear? We highly doubt so. They think that this hole in their heart can just be easily filled up by joining some random support group and bonding and over these shared grievances, which is no thank you. I can guarantee you that just about nobody in the world has fully recovered from a death of a loved one, and this is a very, very big misconception that the government keeps on trying to push forth that we don't really see make sense. The next thing we talk about is the Deputy Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister mainly just talks about mainly addresses a few things, right? And the number one thing is they say love is human interaction. No man is an island. People will just find nothing in their life and they won't find enjoyment in them because they'll never have any friends. They won't have any people around them. They'll just be one loner their entire life, right? We don't really see how this makes sense. Panel, do not let OG get away with this because they have been getting away with too many unfair and just plainly incorrect definitions of love. I really, really doubt that you can that you would just basically love just about anything in life, right? You can make friends that you won't love. You can make you can have hobbies that you won't love. You can have a lot of things in life that will give you enjoyment, that will give you experiences of the human condition that you can enjoy in life without saying that you love them 100% of your body, right? So basically, that's all. Now, moving on, let's move on to finally closing government, right? They say that, oh, you know what? People can just move on from love. No, you won't. The simple truth is, and something they've already mentioned, is that love really doesn't just disappear, right? You don't really just suddenly, recover from love, from the love of
Points up.
No, thank you. If that is the truth, then sorry to say, but that might just not be love, right? Love looks like, smelling a familiar scent and immediately thinking of a lost one. Love looks like, seeing something 10, 20, 30 years after they have died and immediately being reminded of that lost one, right? We don't really see how government can just no thank you, that people in the world are just going to suddenly recover from the loved one or the loss of a loved one, and they're suddenly people are just going to be happy, right? We don't really see that happening in status quo, and I can guarantee you can walk up to anybody in the street and ask them whether they've actually fully recovered from a loss of a loved one, and I can guarantee you the answer is no. Now finally, there was actually interesting POI just now about the idea of the experience of human condition and how we're suddenly gatekeeping an experience of the human condition, right? Government will have no thank you. By opposing the value of loving and losing, we're actually denying people a core part of the human experience, and that is simply not the truth. On the opposition, and that's not something that we're actually arguing. We're not denying that the natural role of love in life or the reality of loss. Rather, we're questioning the value of embracing love when loss is guaranteed. Highly no thank you. Stop badgering, please. When it brings unnecessary pain that can permanently alter one's outlook on life, right? Experiencing the full range of human emotions, including joy, sadness, and resilience, is indeed valuable, but it doesn't mean that we should willingly enter into situations that lead to emotional harm, especially when these situations are avoidable. No one will argue that there are other kinds of intense human pain, such as grief or trauma, should be pursued just because they're part of life. That doesn't mean that just because it's part of human life doesn't mean
of information, last chance to engage.
No, thank you. Actively go and seek out for it, right? So in the same way, we don't have to embrace the love that comes with love, the loss that comes with love. No, thank you. No. Finally, substantives. Let's move on to let's talk about how love is actually a risk, right? This is an idea that we're going to be vertically extending on, and which is the idea that to love is to willingly commit yourself fully, to make yourself fully vulnerable. And today we will tell you as to properly explain to you why you don't fully recover from a loss of a loved one, or the loss of a love, right? Today we tell you that the risk that we see when we weigh between the two worlds that we have today is just simply not worth it. Let me be the one to help you weigh these two worlds, right? The truth is that the world on either side is not a fairy tale world. Let's take proposition at their very, very, very best and agree that yes, there are inherent gains from, let's say, the memories and lessons you learn from someone. You can have valuable experiences. You can have valuable values that you learn from somebody, as even after their love is lost. That's absolutely true. You can definitely grow. However, the chances of a person to actually see that and learn from that and grow from that is also just a chance. And while also weighing that with the fact that it is 100% chance that there is going to be devastation and heartbreak when you lose a loved one, we simply don't think that risk that we've been talking about throughout this entire motion is worth it. And therefore, we are so very proud to propose, because we don't see that risk being worth it, and that is something that government will need to fully explain. Thank you very much.
The tears of joy, sadness, happiness, and sorrow, shaped by the memories that we've created, bonded through love, is the inherent benefit that people from our government bench side gets. However, in the totality of this debate, we don't see any positive outweighing benefit factor rather than rebutting against all their points, is just what we see from the opposition bench that is coming to see. Two things I'll do in my debate. First, couple of some light layers of rebuttals. Second, and on some final weighing points. First of all, the general rebuttals about the opposition bench. Here, we tell you that for the totality of this debate, opposition is relying on a nirvana fallacy, which is completely unrealistic and uncharitable. The only unique extension that CO presents today in this debate is that love is a risk, right? Yeah, and we do take the fact that love and risk reward ratio is worth it. However, walking outside every morning is also a risk in this case. You could get struck by a vehicle, but we still go outside. It's the same level of symmetricality that we still do love and we do love. No, thank you. And then the tension with the screaming DLO about his wanted grandmother. We agree, love is longing. And the entire fact that DLO misinterpreted our POI about debate and how passionate he was about to stand up for his grandma and the loss and the grief, we tell you that this is what love is. Now, I'll basically weigh on all sides on why at the core the CG takes this win. Firstly, on OG, we believe that OG's framing is relatively similar to our representation of emotional and romantic love. And we do agree that in the worst case, this love, as the opening government characterized, could be some emotional and physical love where a person is dead. However, we believe that OG's case mainly focuses on the most extreme cases of love between humans, relationship, love, death, and gain. This is a super extreme case of love and loss, Judge. We tell you that love isn't always contingent on the matter of love for tangible things, right? Again, on the point about this debate, the reason why we speak, we put energy in this debate, even 30 other people of panel watching this debate, is because we love the entire topic, no thank you, about debate. And why even still we're on the tipping point where even though we might chance to take this thing about we might lose, is because we take the opportunity because we love what we do. Even in the case of we might inherently not take anything out of it, where even you're not the main subject in this content, you love it, and that's why you take the risk. Before moving on to, I'll take a POI.
Yeah, so imagine you're on a road. To the east, there's a big debate comm or a big football match. To the west, your mother's dying. Which way do you go?
Okay, first of all, I think that's what I'm literally saying about the most extreme cases that you literally was the most passionate about. I don't know why you're shaking your head, but you literally love the entirety of this debate and this thing as a whole, right? You think debating and dying is symmetric on both sides and how it's love that we can measure on both sides. However, we tell you that no thank you, that love can be is the universal language and can be all broad approach. Now, we think that OO boxes themselves completely out of this debate. I think OO is completely uncharitable in the totality of this debate, that somehow they frame the loss as internal grief, whether or not you can never come back from. I think the passionate speech from DLO showing how you might lose your mom and how you lose this debate show how love matters. DLO screaming in his response to a POI, it's because he loves, because he has the conviction of his beliefs. Even in the best case of this super uncharitable passionate speech by we still take this debate. We told you that feeling of bad and agony is symmetric on both sides, and how we're able to, as prof, mitigate the sorrow and agony in the long run, and how the sorrow isn't always contingent on long terms. This was already refuted by JS, but dropped by the opening member of the opposition. The opposition bench misunderstands the totality of how this idea of loss is framed, and the POI offered to Junseo shows this. They asked if we would not love our grandparents because they were dead. No. Let's remove the genetics and offer a simpler metaphor in the round. Many kids have a pet. When that pet dies, that feeling of loss is horrible. This debate asks us to weigh if the absolute heartache of the loss is so much that it would have been better to not have the love before that loss. Is the pain of heartache worse than the gains of love? Of course not. 3 layers. First, sure, the loss of that pet is horrible, but that low is not as low than the highest high. This is how we get the phrase love hurts, but much more prominent are phrases I love you and love heals all. Second, humans learn how to make moments count, right? Once we realize how finite all of this is, Third, and in the defense to the psychological issue, if they equate love with reproduction, their path would be not have stress about the loss of grandmother, since people will evade procreation. Even if you don't buy this, we tell you that we bite the bullets and win on opportunity cost. I think transitioning from this super harsh case and uncharitable case that opposition wing takes, we tell you that the core purpose of doing things and biting the bullet of a lost outcome is through love, right? We tell you this is that love and loss doesn't always equate to person dying or the most total extreme things. It's love that starts from simple things. Loss that isn't always the person dying. It's simple things that you might lose a game, you might lose this debate. That's where love and loss has to start, and we start as the general framing. Now, Ashley, why do we win over CO? Firstly, they don't have an extension, and their only push is that love is a risk, which we already rebutted to, and then you can never recover from a lost. We've already said that there are coping mechanisms to recover from love, and you slowly lose the loss over time. Coping mechanisms, meaning that you can get into other relationships. Over time, in the long-term perspective that we offer, you start to be burdened with other aspects. I bet most people don't think about the death of their dog every day, even if they may have cried in the short term. On using the definition of love carelessly, though, I don't understand why love is contingent on romantic ones and passionate about something to the point where you're willing to die for it. The logic is clear. Love is a great interest and pleasure to do in something. Why do you limit to this a romantic love, we say? You can have a great interest and pleasure into other people, like friends and family. B, humans in general. This is relevant to our extension. You can have a great interest and pleasure into things like hobbies. Maybe you aren't interested and passionate about debating, but other people can be. That's why normal people throw around sentences like, I love you, or whatever. You can't just say that we're using a broad definition of love without actually telling us why. In conclusion, we win because we win on propensity, scope, and magnitude, how we're able to take more stakeholders, even in this broad term of love that we provide, and how it's not always the extreme cases that the opposition provides. Thank you.
Love is a risk. Love is an uncertainty of placing your trust into a person, of placing commitment into a person. Love is an act of commitment and a reflection of the deep and emotional, intimate bond between two people. It means something significant to people who have connections with each other. So what then when that connection is broken? All right. And I just want to go quickly into just another brief summary on what our extension on this debate as CEO is. We tell you that sure, love is a risk that can yield great results, but it is a risk too big nowadays to take for your average person. Now, before I move on into any more, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some rebuttals to the opening half and why our extension is better than OO's. And then we're going to go into a bit more impacting on what my member has told you. Now, firstly, OG comes in and argues that on our side of the house, people are robbed of the ability to love, even though we tell you that loving, which is stemmed from emotions, which is stemmed from feelings, is a natural thing that people are born with. People can still love. It's just that maybe what we're dealing with is just that people do it less because of what is going on. And you say that the remembrance of a person is what helps someone cope, which is clear to me that maybe people on the government side haven't really been in love because they can't seem to see that people nowadays go through depression because of the memories, because of the remembrance. People are haunted by the memories of their failed relationships. That's why they don't want to go into another one. People are haunted by the memories of their parents who have passed and are no longer with them. You also even mention that people look to TV shows for what love looks like and what to recreate, which is the exact issue why it is a risk in the first place. So many people are trying to recreate something that is unrealistic and doesn't reflect who they are, right? Which is ultimately just going to lead to people chasing something superficial and lead to even more failure, which increases the risk of you looking for love failing.
A point of opening.
No, thank you. A big part of their case also focuses on the loss of a person, which implies the passing or the leaving of someone from your life without really evaluating that people in love can lose other stuff as well. If you want to look at superficial things, for example, you can look at money spent. You can look at time spent with someone who is going to leave you eventually, who is going to like not give a damn about whether or not your relationship really mattered eventually.
Point
Kids
of information.
conform, no thank you, kids conform and choose to do what their parents want them to do over what they actually want to do for themselves because of their love for parents. They literally change themselves inside out to fit into the ideal of what someone they love wants. And people, and in this case, people literally lose themselves out of love for others. And we don't see the opening side, or at least on government side as a whole, engaging as to whether or not this loss in themselves, in their own identity, is worth the chase for this risk. Now, moving on to OO. OO responds by saying that people can cope better when you don't have grief, and no thank you, and that people kill themselves because of grief, and that it is better to not have it, and it is better to not be a potential suicide victim. But the responses and case ends the opening half in a deadlock, where government side tells you this emotional connection is good, it is worth it, and that everyone should have it. But opening op says that grief kills and it is better to not potentially kill yourself. We come in and say, sure, Gov is right in saying that the emotional connection is good. But to get to that connection, nowadays, no thank you, the risk is too high to take for your average person. For most of us, actually, the risk is too high to take. And that maybe some people are still going to be bold, are still going to endure that pain and take the just to experience that love. But from a more logical standpoint, we say that it is not worth all the harm that could be done to you. It's just like saying, sure, it is a good thing that you can win millions of dollars off a lottery ticket, but the chance is so low that you have to question yourself, is buying the ticket really worth it, right? And OO is basically trying to prove why having love is a bad thing. But we tell you that having love is good. It's just that the risk is too high, which is why we would much rather the other option and save ourselves the hurt, save ourselves the pain, and save ourselves the trouble. Now, moving on to closing government.
Point of information.
They open their case by saying that, look, in our worst case scenario or whatever, we're going to replace and mimic past loves, which is more than likely just going to be unhealthy in the first place. And my first speaker has already characterized to you why that is so. And it is harmful not only to yourself, but the other person as well. It is emotionally abusive, and it undermines the special connection that you have had with that person that you lost. That your first half was literally hyping up in the first place, right? He was literally telling you how that special connection is so unique, is so good, and you come in and undermine that. And love isn't, and they also come in and talk about how love isn't always about relationships. And OO's response was actually valid in saying that comparing your interests to your emotional deep connection with another person is simply an insult, no thank you, to what relationships mean. It undermines the effort and it undermines the mentality that people put into relationships. If my connection between my mom and I is the same as my love for the sport of basketball, then you're basically implying that it is highly likely that I will be able to not love her anymore one day, which just ignores the deep connection that I have with her, right? And there's this huge and throughout this debate, there's just this huge big focus on familial love, and there's no really there's not much of a response to my member talking about how people coming into this world loving their family is inherent because they are not aware of what loss is. There's not really any engagement in that. All right, but now I'm gonna do a little bit of just final weighing. All right,
before POI
as to why we win this debate. Right, my member has already characterized to you on how we assess the risk of trying to love someone or finding love in someone from a logical standpoint to appeal to an average person why the risk of loving is not worth taking due to the loss. It's more of trying to win on lottery numbers nowadays, if for lack of a better analogy. He has explained to you in his analysis why today's version of true love has been so idealized and romanticized to the point where it is nearly impossible to find that connection. And he also goes on to tell you that in general, just that the risk is too big to take for that reward, and that it is the reward to risk ratio is disproportionate. Why is this significant then? Because everything adds to the risk factor, and we tell you that the emotional trauma of getting led on, getting played, the loss of trust in people you have connections with, the hopelessness of trying to find someone who can love you like you do is simply not worth potential deep connection with someone who is probably just going to eventually leave you anyway, or at least have the risk that they're going to do in the first place, which is why we're very proud to oppose.
Thanks everyone for an excellent